John, I'm going to try and get us back on timeline. Never follow a policeman. He's always going to be 20 minutes late. Anyway, okay, how many pilots, operators, people who fly regularly are in the room? Put your hand up. Okay. How many people have gone Inadvertent IMC? Keep your hand up if you've gone Inadvertent IMC. If you haven't, put your hand down. Okay, so we got a few people, maybe, have we? Anyone being honest? Yeah? Now put your hand down if it was on MVG. So there's no one left. So looks as if maybe us two here are the only people who've done it on MVG. Perfectly correct. MVG will get you more in the shit. Okay, let's be blunt about it. It will lead you up the garden path. You'll end up in the shit sooner or later if you're not careful. So, slide, please. I'm just going to say slide. No. Does it? Press the button for me, John. Okay. Why have a dog and bark yourself? Okay. Setting the scene. Okay. I'm an ex-military helicopter pilot. Okay, search and rescue. Somewhere around 7,000 hours. I was 5,000 hours plus at this. Okay, quite old. 1998. Bell goes at about 9 o'clock in the morning. 9 o'clock in the evening, middle of winter. It's been snowing most of the afternoon, and they say, there's someone missing in the Larry Grew. Okay, now the Larry Grew is in the Cairngorms in northern Scotland. It's the highest point in the Cairngorms. You've got somewhere around 4,500 feet. They're not big according to the Alps, but it's enough problems. Okay, there's the Larry Grew. And that's what the weather was like when we went down it. Don't forget it's dark. There's our man in the bottom. It's dark. The only thing that's missing is the doggy, of course. There's always a dog. Okay. Now, he was by the pools of D, right at the bottom of the Larry Grew. At both ends, it opens up. So we find him at the southernmost by the pools of D. And he's got his little head torch on. We find him. He's a little bit cold. The dog is definitely pissed off. And the dog is the first into the aircraft. Okay? He shoots up the stairs. We haven't got any problems getting him in. He's in next to the pilots, next to the heater, before the guy's got his pack up the stairs. Anyway, so we set off back, and we're going to go northwards to drop him off. So we're at the southern end of the Larry Grew, right down the end, and we're going to go northwards. We've got MVG on. It's been snowing. We've got no problems going down the Larry Grew to find him. We've had no problems. So we set off. 100 feet, 100 knots. Where we're going, quite happy. And the two of us at the front go, yeah, I can see the far end. So we're happy. 10 seconds later, bang, we're IMC. Now, set the scene. 1 year before, a Sea King had been in the Highlands. It had been on the west coast. It needed to come back to the east coast, and they climbed out. They decided they would go over the top. Got to 10,000 feet, service ceiling, and they went just IMC. 2 minutes later, they selected full power, and they were still going down. The aircraft had iced up, and it kept going. Nothing they could do. There was no question of 180ing, max power, min power speed, you're going down. They spat out into the bottom of a valley. No, they came out of a cloud, icing came off the aircraft, and they managed to level the aircraft just before it hit the ground. So that's in the back of our mind. There is no way we're going up. And I'm very glad that you said, no longer do the 180. That is a sure way of getting the leans. You first action is roll into a turn. You are going to get the leans. Because I did it a year later. I got the leans, and it was horrible. Okay? You've got to tell the co-pilot you've got them. And all he went is, so have I, boss. So you weren't going anywhere. So what happened? We're IMC, 100 feet, 100 knots. We did a quick stop, totally IMC, holding on the nail, and that's all you can do. Gently lower the nose, and just do a quick stop. All I did, imagine what my first action was, besides saying, shit. Okay, because that was what the first action was, well, it wasn't shit, it was something else, okay? And my second action was, woof, woof, go forward lever, fully back, because I'm not going to hit the dashboard when we hit the ground, okay? So straps being done up very quickly. So we did a quick stop. Do it. Try next time you're out there doing a bit of handling, try a quick stop at 50 feet without looking outside. You can do it. Believe it or not, it's not that difficult. We did it. Started at 100, came to the hover. I started pattering once we went back through 40. I wasn't flying it. I started pattering, just giving the other guy, you're straight. Don't want to say much, because he's probably not listening very much either, because he's so overloaded. We came to the hover. That's when you've really got to chip in. You've got to give him some clues as to what's going on. So I was looking at the Doppler, saying, you're in the hover, in the hover. I didn't give a shit if he went a little bit one way or the other. All you got to say is you're in the hover. He did a spot turn, 180 on instruments. Once we all settled out, I said, are you okay? He said, yeah, go. And we went back the other way we'd come. And we came out about a minute later, okay? Very chastened. Did we report it? No. Occupational hazard, as far as we were concerned. I think a reporting culture now would probably say that we'd gone back and we'd written it up. We certainly, spread it amongst the flight. Why? I was the boss. The other pilot was my deputy. Do I think I could have done what he did? Maybe not. I'd like to think I did, but he was good. What is he now? He's a test pilot. He was gifted. You just got to hope on the day that your other pilot's bloody good. But you've got to have a think about it. Have a think about it. What is the worst situation I can get in? And that was brilliant, Stefan. Ending up above cloud, not instrument rating, where you go. And my Air Force's philosophy is, you go IMC, you roll wings level, and you pull like a bastard, okay? Do not flare, do not come back on speed, just select full power, and up you go. Once you're all settled out, you may come back to min power speed to go up even quicker. But what you do not do is turn until you're all settled down on instruments. And don't forget, our seeking, slide please, is pretty antiquated and it hasn't got an autopilot as such. All it's got is a bower out hold. So they are the mighty seeking, and that was us, literally. Okay, next slide. What you're trying to do, you're trying not to be the top picture. Okay? That is what you don't want to be. They all walked away. Some of them limped, but they walked away. Where you can do this sort of thing, you're perfectly correct, do it in the simulator. And more simulators, there's some providers in the hall, are doing MVG-equipped simulators. Do it. Do this sort of thing. Play the Stefan incident in the simulator. That was 6 months later. This guy ended up in the situation we were, but he wasn't IMC, but the snow came in, and he just said, sod it, land and live. He just put the aircraft on the ground, and he left it there for 48 hours. Okay? Hey, that's an engineering problem, not a piloting problem from now on. It took 24 hours to defrost the aircraft, But he was an experienced guy. He just called quits. He said, I cannot see anything. Dump the lever. And luckily, the aircraft stayed upright. Okay? So run them through. The experienced guys, and I do not envy police crews. Why? And same with us on search and rescue, you don't have the crew room banter anymore. When I started out, I was in a Chinook squadron, and you learned from the senior pilots. You listened. If you were lucky, you were invited into the card school. You know, you were invited to play cards because they wanted to take money off you as the junior pilot. And you learn from them telling you war stories. They were old because they got away with it. And they'd probably been there, seen it, and done it. Next slide, please. That's me. My moral is, roll wings level, pull like a bastard. But don't forget, if you haven't got an icing clearance, you may have to do something else. Because you may go up for a minute, but you're going to be coming back down pretty damn quickly, sooner or later, maybe. But it's interesting to have a talk with someone like Bernd about icing clearances on aircraft. If you don't think you're going to pick up much ice, keep going. Okay? That's my story.
And dare I say, Tim, as a former military engineer, I would have much rather have had to get in a car and climb and find a horrible place like that than have to worry about what happened afterwards.
Yeah. It's far better to go and defrost an aircraft for 24 hours than it is to pick up the pieces. That aircraft, by the way, did go back to flying, okay? It's always cheaper to rebuild than buy a new one.
And actually, I remember I was at Lossiemouth when that happened. And I know the people who got in the car and didn't mind picking it up like that. Thanks, Tim. And I think this is really interesting to share these kinds of stories. And Johnny, maybe I can invite you up to do next. Let's give Tim a little round of applause. Actually, another story. When I got involved in military accident investigation, the first thing that the defence psychologist said was that the first thing you have to do is listen to the tape and find out whether the pilot said the F word or the C or the S word, and that gives you a clue what to do next. And actually, that was pretty true. Johnny, thanks very much.
That's a hard act to follow. Right, just a little brief background on me. I'm basically a PPL trainer. I deal in the PPL world with the basic training, and I build private owners, single engines, no automation, all that kind of basic stuff. And I have some slides I've been asked to abbreviate quickly with the inadvertent. Is it inadvertent? I think one of the problems that we have from a training issue at the very basic level is people don't think inadvertent. Oh, it's accidental, it doesn't matter. But we've been trained how to do something. We've been trained what to do in the event of. We know what we can do with the weather. We're a helicopter, we can land anywhere. So we took off. And this at the very basic level, we carried on. We weren't going anyway. Why? Was it a deliberate attempt to take off? Did we intentionally want to take off into bad weather? Did we calculate that we took off into bad weather? So I think at the very, very concept level, we need to talk more about DVE, as we know about. We actually, on a PPL level, it's a big white fluffy cloud, and we just have to get around it and avoid it. But that's not how it works. If you're going to go at IIMC, actually, you get a bit lower, a bit slower, cloud comes in, get around, duck and dive, duck and dive, duck and dive. So maybe we should actually be teaching it as continued flight into DVE. Because they're continuing, they keep going, they keep going, they keep going, and they need to put themselves in there. The aircraft's unstable. I agree 100%. Don't turn the aircraft. You'll instantly roll it. You'll instantly lose it. So you will actually go through some very, very interesting mental processes and thought processes. You will increase your workload. You'll go into tunnel vision. Your stress level will go off the scale. You'll actually go regress. Your ability to actually think straight will regress, and you'll go back to your basic historic instincts of controlling. You won't understand the instruments. You will go back to your basic inability and basic prehistoric settings. That will lead to the loss of control, and eventually the fatal accident. Why? Well, we're optimist pilots. We're all egotistical optimists, to be honest. We always think we're better pilots than we are. We can get away with it. We think the better is, it's better than I actually forecast. I've seen that before. We can get away with that. So, well, I got away with it last time, so I can get away with it this time. We don't fail. We don't land anywhere. That would be embarrassing, having to admit that you failed in your mission. And we're all risk takers. If we weren't risk takers, we wouldn't fly helicopters. So what is the risk? The risk is risk perception. Or is it risk tolerance? Funny enough, you'll find in most accidents, it is actually the misperception of risk, not the tolerance of the pilot is willing to take. And the big thing is investment. We will invest in that flight. We've driven there to the airport. We've got it in the aircraft. We've done the pre-flight. We've done all the systems. We've done the planning. We've done the paperwork. We've got our friends from. We've invested in the flight. May as well pre-flight have a look. No, we can start up. We can always turn back. We'll invest. We'll invest. We'll invest. And if it gets too bad, we can always come back. We always land en route. We've done all the investment. The human thought process is the human brain is terrible at giving up on an investment. You will just keep going. Just get down a bit, left a bit, right a bit. Which brings to a very interesting question. This is actually, we're getting to the legal realms now, and again, from a basic training point of view, from a PPL, at the very, very thing. Is it error? Is flying IIMC, is it error? A mistake, especially one that causes problems or affects the result of the aircraft? Or is it negligence? So failure to behave with the level of care of someone of ordinary prudence would have exercised in the same circumstances. I think there's a very, very big problem with making people understand that taking off into bad weather may have some serious outcomes. So, pilot negligence. You took off, you didn't take off intending to die, but did your passengers know what you were thinking of? Is the aircraft insured because of the Negligence Act? Is the legal action of negligence definition? So this is kind of things we should be teaching at a very basic PPL knowledge level. And basically, how do we survive this? How we train it? Yeah, we should have personal weather limits. We should teach people to keep to them, maintain them, understand them. Do not take off. Just as simple. If the weather's not good enough, you've got the ability to forecast and simulate and see the weather. Don't go. Divert early. If it starts to look like it's getting worse, divert early. Slow down and land. Don't even go into the DV. Is my brief, rapid, trying to get back on schedule talk.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. For the next part of the session, I think if we show Claude had a video, if we can show that, and then I'll pass the microphone to Claude, and then we'll have some thoughts from Bruce, and then we'll take questions and have some discussion with the audience.
Hello,
so are we able to show the video?
Just before.
Oh, just before we start the video, sorry.
Sorry. Hello, everybody. My name is Claude Vuichard. I'm better known by the Vuichard recovery, but I recovered 3 times from a UIMC. Roughly $17,000, and I can tell you, I'm convinced not to climb in the mountains, because you will cross the Matterhorn and you will descend as a rock because they are full of ice. And with 75% probability of the helicopter that don't have any autopilot, so that it's nice when you have a pilot. Governmental organization have the possibility to put IFR pilots inside. But for me, the most important message here, that we need a democratization of the IFR in Europe, because the burden to get an IFR is quite too high. So we need to have a basic IFR, starting with a non-certified IFR aircraft, and finish the license. Reduce the burden of the theoretical part. In the States, you can do it in 3 weeks, no 3 days, the IFR, Bruce, I think. And in Europe, it's quite a big burden. So my big message, we need a democratization of the IFR to get more people with an IFR rating. That is the main message. Well, but just look about the video. It's 6 minutes about the technique of the different techniques of turn or not, climb or not. Of course, we just look or descend, even descend in the UIMC. Okay, so we start the video.
The blue curve shows the power required for a desired true airspeed at level flight for a given weight, altitude, and temperature. Setting the maximum cruise power, the helicopter will cruise at maximum horizontal speed VH. The delta between power setting and power required is therefore 0. As soon as the helicopter decreases its forward speed by 10 knots, caused by a very small cyclic input, immediately the helicopter starts to climb with a rate of climb of roughly 1,000 feet per minute. Or, if the helicopter increases its speed with the same power setting, the helicopter immediately starts to descend with a rate of descent of 1,000 feet per minute. On the other hand, if the power setting is reduced to roughly 40% torque, corresponding to Vy speed, for the best rate of climb, an increase or decrease of the speed by 10 knots will result in a rate of descent of only roughly 200 feet per minute. With very small collective inputs, it's easy to correct the situation to maintain level flight at Vy. For a 180-degree turn at VH or Vy with the H125. If we fly the 180-degree with a standard rate turn with a VH of 130 knots, the bank angle will be 20 degrees, and the turn radius will be 0.68 nautical miles. The rate of turn will be 3 degrees per second. For a 180-degree turn, it takes you 1 minute. Your position will be 1.36 nautical miles away from your last visual reference point. If you use the coupler of the autopilot at VH, the helicopter will need the same space for the turn. Reducing the power setting corresponding to Vy of 60 knots, simultaneously start your turn with a bank of 25 degrees. The turn radius will be only 0.11 nautical miles. The rate of turn will be 8.5 degrees per second. For a 180-degree turn, it takes you only 21 seconds. Your position will be 0.22 nautical miles away from your last point of visual references. Avionics or navigation applications that record the flight track are very helpful, as they allow us to fly back on the opposite track. In summary, the effect of cyclic inputs at fast cruise is huge and results immediately in a high rate of descent or climb. Without a serious instrument, training, and recency, it will end rapidly in a battle to maintain control in a UIMC, leading in the worst case to lose control of the helicopter. Around Vy, the effect of cyclic inputs is very small, and therefore the cyclic can be fixed with your upper thigh when the desired speed around Vy is reached, and then you can just correct the vertical speed by small collective inputs only. This technique will prevent loss of control in UIMC, and the turn radius will be roughly for time, less with 25 degrees of bank angle. This could be paramount, especially with small obstacle clearances. It's obvious that this Vy 180-degree turn technique must be practiced regularly, so that in case of UIMC, it can also be applied correctly under high stress. Prevent any situation that could lead to a UIMC, both by proper weather briefings and alertness regarding possible DVE in flight during the day and night, and by reducing the speed when encountering a DVE. Options in event of UIMC. If the helicopter is IFR certified, and the pilot has an IFR rating, and the infrastructure allows IFR, and the performance allows it to operate at minimum safe altitude without icing conditions, or if the helicopter is fully de-iced, climb and contact ATC and declare an emergency. If you have a helicopter without IFR certification, or the pilot is without an IFR rating, or you're in an area without any IFR infrastructure, train and use the Vy 180-degree turn technique.
Okay, now we've seen the VRM. Look about the, you see on the left side, you see the controls. Now we're getting in a IMC condition in the valley. So the choice is to turn to the right. And look now about the correction I do on the collective to maintain the vertical speed 0. And I can tell you it's not easy to do it in the VRM simulator, really, but with training, everything is a matter of training, of course. And now I do the turn, and with the lower speed, and turn in the valley. And after the turn, we will see now the sun is coming to the H125, so we are back out. And now we remove the clouds to see where we turned. Now we remove the clouds, you see we turned in really a narrow valley. Huh? So with a little bit of training, of course, you are able to do that. But it's important that the specialists agree on also the authority should agree on a recovery technique that we can train and use in the ATOs and in the company. So.
Thanks. And maybe, Claude, you can hand the microphone to Bruce. I don't know if you want to stand up and use the hand mic next, or you'll come up to the front. I think as Bruce comes up, so one of the, obviously I'm not a helicopter pilot myself, so involved in these discussions, one of the big things that has been interesting to learn is very much to understand the very specific nature of the different types of flights, the many different situations, the many different helicopters, and the many different solutions there are, as you've heard already. And, it's very, very specific. And I think I've had a lot of discussions with people about the key to anything when it comes to safety is understanding the purpose and what you're doing and what might be relevant in that situation. But Bruce, I'm sure you have lots of good views on this, so I'll hand over to you.
Perfect. I will be brief, which people who know me know that's not my forte. So I have a presentation, but I'm not going to use any of my presentation. So it strikes me, as I sit here today, to listen to Stefan, Tim, Johnny talk about real events, and it quite honestly makes me anxious. I think anyone here who's flown, has made their living flying, probably has encountered something like this, and just reimagining it or listening to their experience makes me anxious. It's so visceral. Several things, so I wrote down, these are the notes, and again, I'm a pilot, so I write stuff down on scraps of paper, and so these are some things that were said that I think were worth reiterating. Preparation and avoidance. This is about avoidance. This should not be about how we escape once we're in that situation. Statistically, we know your longevity in that environment is not long. And we must take the time to prepare. When I listened to Stefan talk about the pilots, when you have a fuel state that's not great, and you're returning over marginal weather conditions, that's a little bit like loading the gun, pulling the trigger, and putting it to your temple. And there are many pilots, quite honestly, who are a hell of a lot better than me, who aren't here today because they thought they could. And they found out they couldn't. So let's not be so bold and so brave. Let's be a little humble, a little circumspect, and let's not go. Johnny mentioned something, in my view, it's about loss frame. He said pilots don't like to lose. We don't. And when we take off, we have a job to do. We want to succeed. We're in a loss frame once we take off. In other words, if we don't meet the mission, if we don't conclude the flight, we feel like we have failed. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But we can help that pill go down by how we respond to people who make that decision. When someone goes out and flies, and maybe they don't do a great job, or maybe the weather changes, something happens, and ultimately they have to make a precautionary landing. How do you treat them? what often happens is one of two things. Either there's silent or vocal condemnation, or perhaps as bad, advice given. People will say, oh, Bruce, did you try to do X? Did you think about Y? Did you consider this? Did you think about that? And really the message that is being sent to that pilot is, you didn't try hard enough. You're not good enough. And as long as we continue to espouse that kind of behavior, our behavior, we will continue to have these events. It's far better to say to the person, great job, thank you for landing, thank you for not crashing. Can I get you a hotel? Do you have a car to the hotel or to the bar to get a beer because you probably want a drink? Do not offer advice. Help them. As experienced aviators, it's our responsibility. It really is. And by the way, people will follow your lead. They will not always follow your words. They will follow your actions. If you're the most experienced aviator in the group, you damn well better be the most conservative. And through your behavior, others will follow. If you think you're all that in a bag of chips and you're out there taking inordinate risk, you cannot blame your subordinates or your peers or even your superiors for doing the same. So let's all step back, recognize this is an emergency situation. In fact, I believe you will never face an emergency more harrowing than a UIMC event, ever. That's as brief as Bruce can be, so I'm finished. Thank you.
Those words are probably, there isn't a person in this room when they heard the stories that have been shared today, kind of didn't think, thank God that wasn't me, or what would I do in those situations? And I think, thanks very much to all our panelists for those words. I was going to say, the next thing we'd like to do is, hopefully there are questions. So Bernd and Michel and I are ready with the microphone poised. If you have a question for our panelists, I'm sure they would love to answer them. Anybody, please? Jill, excellent. I knew you wouldn't let me down.
Thank you. I have one question because I'm a pilot also. I'm still rated on the 120. And when I listen to all of you, finally you agree at 90%, but we have still 10% of disagreement. And I would challenge you, and also the authority, to put you together in a room and to find, even if there are some operational situations which are a little bit different, but not so much, to find something, kind of guidance, kind of something where everybody agrees. Because I think, I don't know for the others, but for some pilots, I think having listened to you, it's very interesting, and thank you all for your presentation. It was fantastic. Thank you very, very much. But at the end of the day, say, oh, guy, do we have to do a quick stop finally? Or do I have to take VY on 180 degrees turn? Okay. And the story of IFR rating is key, and I think the fact that it's better to be IFR rated and with an IFR helicopter and to climb. That's clear, but unfortunately, everybody is not IFR rated. So this was my comment on my question. I want to put you in a room, and you get out of the room only when you agree together.
I don't think we'll get out the room, Gilles. It's circumstance, isn't it? It's circumstance and what you're qualified. Are you IFR rated? Is the aircraft capable of doing it? What's the weather above? You haven't got an option if you're going to end up as an ice cube 1 minute later. You're not going to go up. How much fuel have you got? That is backed you into a corner. But the great thing that Bruce says, shove it on the bloody ground before you go in Inadvertent IMC, preferably next to a pub, and if not, next to a road or a farmhouse where you can get a cup of tea.
And I think there's some really great, clear, simple messages, but I completely take your point. I think that's one of the, well, it's always been the goal. I think it's a great starting point. Yeah, the fact that we got all of these people here on a stage was a great first kind of step. And certainly within the vast discussion, you know, we've been talking about this for a while. That's kind of the next thing is how can we take all of these pieces of information? I think what you said there, Tim, particularly is there's so many different situations and circumstances, and how can we lay that case out? So if you're, particularly for smaller operators, trying to decide when I do X and I'm in this situation, what do I do? I had a Danish pilot who spent a lot of time flying fixed wing and now transferred to rotary during COVID and said, yeah, the situation seems a lot less black and white in terms of, you know, what should I do than I'm used to in fixed wing. And he was very uncomfortable with that. So I always have him at the back of my head, you know, and the more we can do of that. Are there any other, I see we've got a question at the back. I'll come running to the back.
There is as well.
You keep talking, Ben.
Questions, although we didn't plan for
We've got it.
But no, okay. This is for the panelists. If you can read it, that's a question. I don't know who wants to answer this.
So if I read the question, then we'll come to the one at the back right after. So
actually, that's my question.
Oh, it's your question. Dave, I'll let you ask it for yourself then. Go.
So Dave Harris from Babcock. The reason I asked the question, one of the accidents that was mentioned on the presentation earlier was one of our accidents, and I did the internal investigation for it. One of the things we learned was that the pilots were really inclined to press on. That was talked about earlier as well. We got Steve Jarvis, the human factors expert, to look at this really closely and to try and work out what we could do as an antidote to that. One of the things that he encouraged us to do was set decision points or decision triggers and to preset those before flight so that everyone in the crew was aware of what should initiate a decision being made rather than the decision being something that was sort of left to chance. So I just wondered what the panel's view on those was.
Should we go from that side to that side? Bruce, do you want to go first?
Does this work? Yes.
Yep.
So I would say that is critical, and it works only if we follow the triggers. So if your trigger is, I'm just going to throw out a number, it doesn't matter, it can be any number, but 500 feet and 2 miles. That means if it's 499 feet and 20 miles, you park the ship. Otherwise, it's a sliding scale, and we just slowly get lower and slower. And kind of back to Gilles, and I know, and I'm not disputing that we have to be cognizant of ice, but let's go back to ice for a second and a trigger. If I'm flying IMC or VFR in conditions below IMC conditions, and I know there's ice in the clouds, then that should be an increase in my trigger. In other words, if you know you cannot punch into the cloud for any reason, then you better damn well make sure you're not going to. And I will say, just kind of as an end to that, don't worry about what may kill you. You better take care of first what is going to kill you. So while people are driving around worried they're going to go into the cloud and get ice, if you descend into the hill, you don't really need to worry about ice. So we fear things that are visceral. If a German Shepherd came in the back of this room right now, half the room would pet the little doggy. If we filled the room 5 feet deep with water and put a shark in here, everyone would flee. But dogs kill many more people than sharks. How many people have died IIMC, in ice? How many? No one knows anyone. How many have died by striking the surface? Everyone knows someone.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Stefan.
Yes, so I agree with 200% with that. And in our company, we set a specific trigger. For example, it is to set the radar altimeter to 500 feet ground, for example. And when you reach this limit, then you all in the crew hear a warning tone, and that can be the trigger for someone in the crew to say, hey, that's it, we are going to land. And what we say, if this trigger, this warning gong comes twice, that's it. But that, for sure, it will not prevent everything, yeah? You know what I mean? So you have, but it is a tool, nothing else, yeah? And you need a crew which use this tool and act according to that, yeah?
And I think that's always the challenge, isn't it? It's that you can't have a solution for every possible situation, but you can prepare people as best you can. Tim, maybe I come to you next.
Dave, can I ask, are you onshore or offshore? Babcock. Everything. Yeah. People like police, people like HEMS, yeah, there's always a keenness to get the mission done. SAR, you know, there was no question, no normal sane person wouldn't have got airborne that night. But, you know, when you told there's a man, and we weren't told about the little doggy, you're going to go. You know, and the weather was fit enough as far as we were concerned, but we backed ourselves into a corner. Well, we didn't back ourselves into a corner, we were just hit by circumstances. But I always used to tell my guys, no, there were certain guys who the wind got above 30 knots, they didn't go flying. I said, well, actually, that's when you should go training. Because on the night, you ain't going to have the choice about whether you go to that fishing vessel that's going down. I'm not going to go because it's 30 knots. What? That's when you're going to go. You know, that's when they go down. So you've got to train as you're going to fight, as we used to say. So you've got to go out there in the shitty weather to see what it's like. And that's where you learn the lessons. But you're perfectly correct. Sooner or later, when it's training, you knock it on the head quicker. You know, your level of tolerance of how far you're going to go is less. And certainly our rule book, the second rule was, if you're on a live mission, there is no rules. It's captain's judgment. You know, and that's where, in training, we had rules. So there were height limits, there were visibility limits. But when you get to a live job, that's where you're relying on the captain to make the right decision. And there aren't no rules. It's all about doing the job. So, yeah, I fully agree. You've got to have triggers. Something that's going to force you to go home. And it's personal comfort and how experienced you are.
Thanks for that, Tim. Johnny?
Yeah. One of the problems I have with triggers is that people tend to say, well, we'll go to 400 foot, 300 foot, 200 foot, 1 mile, whatever. And so they'll fly to it. They'll go, well, I've got to go to that. The book says I can go, I've got to go to that. Try a bit more. Just see. I think it's completely based on the crew, the cockpit, anyone on board who says, no, this is getting too stupid, or make the trigger much further away than it is. But people will fly to that trigger because they will go to that limit. You know, how many people drive along the motorway at 110 kilometers an hour? It's 120, everyone does a little bit more. So everybody will always, if you set a fixed number in the book and say that's it, people will go to it because they feel they have to.
And I guess, coming back to you, Dave, I guess one of your challenges was where do you set those triggers, having had that conversation in your organisation, I guess?
Yeah, so we asked people to set triggers that aren't just numerical, that aren't just related to that aren't just related to the weather limits and so on. What we're asking people to do is think of it a bit more widely, like Bruce said, with the icing. Yes, you might want to make a decision earlier. If the potential diversion is closing at a certain time, then that closes off an option, and maybe that's a time you make a decision as a crew to do something different. So it's not about weather limits, it's about looking at the overall situation.
One question on that. So was any member of that crew could say, that's it?
I think setting a trigger doesn't prevent anyone playing their let's go home card at any time, really. A trigger is just something to stop that press on itis to ensure that a decision is made. The decision might well be to continue, but it's to actively make a decision rather than to just continue.
Wish to make a comment of that, if I may. I'm a psychologist by education, so there's a human tendency to stretch the limit just a little bit, hoping that you can make it anyway, right? So that's the difficulty with this criteria. And as I think as Bruce mentioned, that don't do that. You fix the threshold, you stay with the threshold. I'll present very quickly an experiment that you can replicate with your people, your family. It's about the threshold when you change the situation just a little bit. You take a cup of coffee without sugar. And you put it in just a little bit of sugar, but so small an amount that you cannot make a difference. You cannot taste the difference, right? Then you get the second one, and you repeat the operation with the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, and so on. And they all taste the same. But now you take the 10th cup of coffee, compare it to the first cup of coffee, and then you say, yes, there's more sugar. It's sweeter, yeah? So that's to show that we have a tendency as human beings to play with thresholds and stretch limits, and it can be dangerous business indeed.
And in fact, one of the things I always loved as an engineer doing ACS investigations, or investigations with pilots and psychologists, is if you ask two pilots for an opinion, you get two opinions. If you ask psychologists for two psychologists for an opinion, you'll get three opinions, which I always found fun. But it's a really good point. So, Claude, maybe I come to you now, and then we'll wrap up and finish up. Claude.
Okay, the triggers are nice. I totally agree with everybody. You can set a radar altimeter. If you have one, you can look the speed. If you are below a cyclist, probably need to stop. But the main message today, the 3 UIMC I had, they were all like pluff, without any trigger before. And I think trigger and training, we should do training. We have now the best simulator, even Airbus approved. We can simulate every situation, and after you learn your proper trigger, that is my message. We need to go to the simulator. You cannot train people. Otherwise, my first UIMC I had with 1,500 hours, the second with 5,000 hours, and the last with 12,000 hours. So we can simulate everything, and that should be set up by a training organization, whatever, by the authority, which kind, weather degradation, snow, what we want to show in the simulator, and to learn people to decide. If you cannot decide if you don't have learned the situation. Now I know. Probably I don't go anymore to an UIMC. Yeah, I know to go out of the vortex recovery, but that is my main message. We need to go in the training, in the simulator, even more than on the aircraft. That is my main message.
Thanks very much, Claude. And I think the message of training and all of the messages we've got from all of the panelists, I think, was a really good follow-up to that question. I look at the time, I think we've exceeded our time a little bit, but hopefully you all really enjoyed that discussion. So a huge thanks, and if you could all give our panelists a big round of applause. Thanks very much. And then also thanks to Bernd and Michel and Just and the rest of the team for all of your hard work, and particularly huge thanks to everybody from ESP and everybody that's involved, Gilles, Matteo, Leonardo, all the other people and all the other organisations that continue to support this work. It's so much appreciated. There's so much great stuff going on, and we will really value, hopefully, the collaboration we do. So thanks very much. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a nice evening. See you tomorrow.